The coach wheels found every stone and rut on the road to Brackenmore, as if the very earth of County Galway wished to test the resolve of those who dared venture into its wet interior. Our man, let us observe him closely now, gripped his surveyor's case with the practiced steadiness of someone who had learned that instruments, unlike people, could be relied upon to remain constant. Thomas Brennan, 42 years of age, drainage engineer by trade and temperament, possessed the kind of face that landowners trusted and laborers didn't immediately distrust, a useful quality in 1874 Ireland. The September rain had been uncommonly persistent, even for Galway. Through the coach window, Brennan watched the landscape transform from the relatively tamed fields near the city to something altogether more primitive. Stone walls gave way to wild hedgerows, then to expanses of sedge and rush that spoke of water lying just beneath the surface. Waiting. Always waiting. He had drained enough marshland to know that water possessed a patience that exceeded human memory. "Brackenmore Village!" The driver's call cut through his observations. Brennan gathered his belongings, the surveyor's case, a worn leather satchel containing his notebooks, and a traveling trunk that held everything else he owned that mattered. Not much, truth be told. 5 years since Margaret's death had taught him that possessions were merely things that could be lost. The village revealed itself slowly through the rain, like a photograph developing in solution. A main street of mud, flanked by low buildings that huddled against the weather. McCarthy's public house stood prominent, its painted sign swinging on rusty chains. The church tower rose above the rest, gray stone against gray sky, topped with a cross that seemed to pierce the low-hanging clouds. Perhaps 200 souls called this place home, Brennan estimated, though he suspected that number swelled and shrank with the seasons and the availability of work. The coach stopped before the public house where several men sheltered under the eaves, smoking pipes and watching his arrival with the careful interest of those for whom any new arrival constituted significant news. Brennan noticed how quickly their eyes catalogued him. His clothing that marked him as neither gentry nor common laborer, his slight limp as he descended from the coach, the professional nature of his luggage. "You'll be the engineer Lord Ashford sent for," said a young woman who appeared from the pub's doorway. Not a question. Dark hair pinned up practically, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in more than they revealed. "I'm Siobhan McCarthy. My father owns this establishment. His lordship arranged for you to lodge here tonight before you go up to the big house tomorrow." Brennan touched his hat. "Thomas Brennan, miss. I appreciate the accommodation." She studied him for a moment longer than comfortable, then nodded toward the men under the eaves. "Don't mind them staring. We don't get many visitors, especially ones come to meddle with the bog." Meddle with the bog. Interesting choice of words, our engineer thought. Not drain or improve or reclaim. Meddle. As if the bog possessed some right to remain undisturbed that his profession inherently violated. Inside McCarthy's, the atmosphere thickened with pipe smoke and the yeasty smell of porter. A turf fire burned in the grate, its particular scent immediately transporting Brennan back to his childhood in Cork, before his education had lifted him into that peculiar space between classes that professional men occupied. The pub's patrons, perhaps a dozen men of varying ages, regarded him with expressions ranging from curiosity to something approaching suspicion. "The drainage man," someone muttered, not quite quietly enough. An elderly woman sat in the corner nearest the fire, her hands wrapped around a glass of something that wasn't beer. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts but still sharp somehow, fixed on Brennan with uncomfortable intensity. "You've come about the crying," she said, her voice carrying despite its quietness. "About the bog maiden who weeps for the lost souls." The pub fell silent. Even the fire seemed to pause in its crackling. "Now, Moira," Siobhan said quickly, "Mr. Brennan's come to do a job of work, nothing more." But old Moira Flanagan, for this was she, keeper of stories that stretched back before the famine, before the Union, perhaps before memory itself became reliable, continued as if uninterrupted. "She cries at dusk and dawn, when the mist rises. 3 men have fled these past months, swearing they heard their own deaths foretold in her voice." Brennan set down his case carefully, aware that his response would establish his position in the village's complex hierarchy. Too dismissive, and he'd be marked as another English sympathizer. Too credulous, and he'd lose any authority his education provided. "I've found," he said slowly, "that Ireland's bogs hold many secrets, not all of them supernatural." A younger man, red-haired and barely out of his teens, brightened at this. "You mean there might be a natural explanation, like the fellows at Trinity College would seek?" "And you are?" "Patrick Doyle, sir, Paddy. I've done some laboring at the estate, know the bog paths better than most." The eagerness in his voice couldn't quite mask something else, a nervousness that seemed disproportionate to the conversation. Before Brennan could respond, the pub door opened, bringing a gust of rain-laden wind and a man who clearly didn't belong to the laboring class. Trim beard, well-cut clothes that managed to appear only slightly dampened despite the weather, carrying a medical bag. "Dr. Edmund Hayes," Siobhan said by way of introduction. "Dr. Hayes, this is Mr. Brennan, the engineer." The doctor's handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "Excellent. I'd hoped to catch you before you vanished into Ashford's clutches. I've some theories about the bog myself, from a naturalist's perspective, you understand. Perhaps we might compare notes?" Here then was something unexpected, an educated man, a potential intellectual companion in what promised to be weeks of isolation. Brennan found himself warming to the doctor immediately, though he noticed how the locals' demeanor shifted slightly, became more guarded. Hayes occupied that same intermediate space that Brennan did, neither fish nor fowl. Necessary, but never quite trusted. As the evening wore on, the pub filled with more villagers, drawn by curiosity and the ancient human need to assess any disturbance to their world's careful balance. Brennan nursed a single pint of porter, listening more than speaking, learning the village's subtle rhythms. He noticed how conversations died when certain names were mentioned, how glances were exchanged when talk turned to the estate's tenants, how young Paddy Doyle kept looking toward the door as if expecting someone who never arrived. The bog itself seemed to press against the village's consciousness like water against a dam. Everyone had a story, a relative who'd gotten lost in the mist, a piece of livestock that had vanished, strange lights that danced above the marsh gas. But underneath these tales, Brennan sensed something else. Fear, certainly, but not entirely of the supernatural. The kind of fear that came from secrets held in common, from knowledge that bound a community together even as it threatened to tear it apart. Morning arrived wrapped in mist so thick that Brackenmore village seemed to exist in isolation from the rest of creation. Brennan woke in his room above McCarthy's pub, to the sound of wheels on wet cobblestones and the low murmur of voices beginning their day's work. His pocket watch, Margaret's last gift, still keeping perfect time, showed 7:30. Lord Ashford expected him at 9. The walk to Brackenmore House took him along a rising road that gradually lifted above the mist line, revealing the estate spread below like a map of feudal arrangements made tangible. The big house itself, Georgian in style with later Victorian additions, commanded the highest ground. Below it, in descending order of elevation and social standing, stretched the home farm, the steward's cottage, the workers' quarters, and finally, at the lowest point where water naturally collected, the vast expanse of bog that was his concern. Lord Ashford received him in a study that spoke of educated tastes constrained by limited means. Good books, but not rare ones. Decent furniture, but showing wear. A fire that burned coal rather than the turf the villagers used. The man himself, 58 years old and carrying it heavily, possessed that particular combination of progressive ideals and inherent paternalism that characterized the better class of Anglo-Irish landlord. "Mr. Brennan, excellent. Tea?" Without waiting for an answer, his lordship poured from a service that had seen better days. "I trust McCarthy's proved adequate?" "Good, good. Now then, to business. I suppose you've heard the local stories about our bog." "The Bog Maiden, yes. Though I find local legends often serve practical purposes beyond mere entertainment." Ashford's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Precisely my thought. Keep the superstitious away from dangerous ground and all that. However, we have a genuine phenomenon here that requires explanation. The crying, or weeping, or wailing, call it what you will, is quite real. I've heard it myself." The lord stood, moving to a map mounted on the wall. His finger traced the bog's outline, perhaps 300 acres of waterlogged ground that formed a natural boundary along the estate's eastern edge. "The sound emerges primarily from this section, where the bog meets the river. Always at dawn or dusk, always when there's mist. 3 of my workers have fled after claiming the sound predicted their deaths. Nonsense, of course. But it's making it damnably difficult to get any work done in that area." "And you want the bog drained?" "Partially. Enough to reclaim perhaps 50 acres for pasture. But more immediately, I need someone with a scientific mind to determine what's causing these sounds. If we can explain it rationally, perhaps we can stop losing workers to superstitious panic." Brennan studied the map, already calculating elevations, water flow, the engineering challenges ahead. But something in Ashford's tone suggested complications. "Has anyone else investigated?" "The previous agent tried, found nothing. Then again, he was drunk more often than sober by the end." Ashford paused, seeming to weigh his words. "There's something else. The Royal Irish Constabulary has been attentive lately. There are rumors of Fenian activity in the county. Constable Fitzgerald, good man, local fellow, thinks the bog stories might be keeping people away from something. Smuggling, perhaps." Ah, here was the delicate matter beneath the practical one. In 1874, 7 years after the failed Fenian Rising, every gathering of Irishmen was suspect, every isolated location a potential arms cache. Brennan kept his expression neutral. "You want me to survey the bog, explain the phenomenon, and report anything unusual I might find?" "Precisely, though I stress the engineering aspect is primary. I'm not asking you to be an informant, Mr. Brennan. Simply to do your job with your eyes open." The afternoon found Brennan at the bog's edge with young Paddy Doyle, who'd appeared at the estate as if summoned, eager to serve as guide. The lad knew the paths through the marsh, the places where a man could walk safely and where the ground would swallow him whole. They carried surveying equipment, notebooks, and a healthy respect for the terrain's dangers. The bog stretched before them, a landscape that seemed to exist outside normal time. Pools of black water reflected the gray sky, separated by hummocks of sphagnum moss and sedge. The air smelled of vegetation in every stage of decay, from the freshly fallen to the ancient peat that preserved everything, wood, leather, flesh, in its acidic embrace. "We'll need to map the depth variations first," Brennan explained, as much to organize his own thoughts as to educate Paddy. "Water finds its level, but bog water lies." They worked steadily through the afternoon, taking measurements, making notes. Paddy proved surprisingly knowledgeable about surveying principles, admitting he'd been reading whatever technical books he could find. "I want to better myself, sir. Maybe study engineering proper someday, like you did." The ambition in his voice was tinged with something else, an urgency that seemed about more than personal advancement. Brennan filed the observation away. In his experience, young men in a hurry often carried secrets that required quick escapes. As the sun began its descent toward the Atlantic, the mist started rising from the bog's surface. With it came a change in atmosphere, subtle but undeniable. The birds fell silent. The wind died. Even the constant whisper of water through reed seemed to pause. Then they heard it. The sound began low, almost below the range of hearing, a vibration felt in the chest rather than heard with the ears. Gradually, it rose in pitch and volume, becoming unmistakably a cry, mournful, desperate, human yet not human. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, rising and falling with a rhythm that suggested breathing, suggested life. Paddy had gone pale, his hand moving involuntarily to the crucifix at his throat. "The maiden," he whispered. But Brennan was listening with different ears, trained ears that had spent 20 years learning how water and wind could conspire to create the most unexpected sounds. There was pattern here, structure. The cry rose and fell with the wind's subtle changes, seemed to emanate from a specific area ahead of them, where tall reeds grew in unusual density. "Come on," he said, moving toward the sound, despite Paddy's obvious reluctance. The reeds stood 7 feet tall, growing from a section of bog that seemed firmer than the surrounding marsh. As they approached, Brennan noticed something odd about their arrangement. They grew in rough lines, almost as if planted. The crying sound intensified, then suddenly stopped as the wind shifted. "Look at these," Brennan said, examining the reeds closely. They were hollow, like all reeds, but these seemed different, thicker-walled, with natural holes along their length. When the wind caught them at just the right angle, "They're like whistles," Paddy said wonderingly, his fear temporarily forgotten. "Great big whistles. Or organ pipes. The wind plays them like a massive instrument." Brennan pulled out his notebook, sketching quickly. "But see how they're arranged. This isn't entirely natural. Someone has been cultivating them, selecting specific varieties, perhaps even tuning them by boring holes." "But why would anyone—" Paddy trailed off, and Brennan caught something in his expression, not surprise at the revelation, but worry about its discovery. As darkness approached, they made their way back to solid ground. The crying had resumed, carried on the evening wind, and Brennan could see how it might drive men to madness if they didn't understand its source. But understanding brought new questions. Who had cultivated these musical reeds? Why go to such trouble to enhance a natural phenomenon? At the bog's edge, they met Constable Fitzgerald making his evening rounds. A solid man in his middle 40s, with the careful eyes of someone who'd learned to navigate between duty and community. "Mr. Brennan, young Doyle, investigating our local mystery?" "Indeed. Fascinating acoustic properties in those reeds." "Acoustic, is it?" Fitzgerald's tone was neutral, but his gaze sharpened. "And nothing else of interest?" The systematic mapping of Brackenmore Bog required the kind of methodical patience that separated true engineers from mere dreamers with theodolites. For 5 days, from September 21st through the 25th, Brennan imposed order on chaos, transforming the marsh's treacherous uncertainties into neat lines and measurements in his notebooks. Each morning, he and Paddy ventured deeper into the bog's interior, returning each evening mud-stained and exhausted to the growing warmth of McCarthy's public house. The work itself possessed a meditative quality that Brennan had always found soothing. Here was problem-solving reduced to its essence. Water flowed downhill, soil had specific absorption rates, gravity remained constant. Unlike human nature, engineering principles never betrayed you with sudden reversals of loyalty or feeling. His surveyor's chain measured exactly 66 feet every time, without fail or favoritism. "You're after finding the bog's bones," Paddy observed on their third day, watching Brennan note the depth readings from their sounding rod. The lad had proven quick to learn, understanding instinctively how water moved through landscape, how to read the subtle signs that distinguished safe ground from sucking marsh. "Every bog has structure beneath the surface," Brennan explained, sketching a cross-section in his notebook. "Ancient stream beds, buried ridges of rock or clay. Find those, and you can predict where water will flow when you cut drainage channels." What he didn't mention was what else he'd been finding. Patterns in the reed growth that suggested human intervention going back years, perhaps decades. The musical reeds, as he'd come to think of them, grew in specific locations where wind patterns would be most consistent. Someone had studied this bog with the dedication of a musician tuning an instrument. The evenings at McCarthy's had evolved into something of a ritual. By the time Brennan arrived, usually around 7 o'clock, his regular table near the fire would be waiting, along with a gathering of villagers eager for news from the bog. They pretended casual interest, but Brennan recognized the careful attention they paid to his every word about the drainage plans. Dr. Hayes had become a regular companion at these evening sessions, bringing his own observations from his naturalist expeditions. "The flora in your bog is quite remarkable," he said on the fourth evening, producing sketches of various plants. "Some species I've never encountered elsewhere in Galway. That reed you've been examining, for instance, it seems to be a hybrid variety." "Natural hybridization?" Brennan asked, though he suspected otherwise. "Possibly, though it would require very specific conditions, almost as if someone had been selecting for particular qualities over many years." Hayes lowered his voice. "Like breeding horses or dogs, but with plants." The doctor's observations confirmed Brennan's suspicions, but before he could pursue the thought, Siobhan McCarthy appeared at their table with fresh pints. She'd taken to joining their conversations when the pub's demands allowed, displaying a sharp intelligence that her careful courtesy only partially concealed. "The gentlemen are discussing our famous bog again," she said, her tone light but her eyes serious. You'll be making us all scientific celebrities, Dr. Hayes, with your botanical discoveries." "Hardly that," Hayes replied, "though I confess the bog's mysteries grow more intriguing by the day. Speaking of mysteries, I've been meaning to ask. I'm running low on certain medical supplies, laudanum particularly. The usual shipment from Galway seems to have gone astray." Siobhan's expression didn't change, but Brennan noticed how her hand stilled on the glass she was polishing. "Times are uncertain. Shipments go missing." "Perhaps you might speak to Father O'Neill. He sometimes knows of alternative sources." Interesting, Brennan thought. Medical supplies going missing, the priest involved in procurement. In his experience, when legitimate supply chains failed, others emerged to fill the need. Ireland had always been a country of alternative arrangements, of problems solved through indirect means. Father Cormac O'Neill himself appeared in the pub later that evening, as he often did, moving between tables with the easy authority of a man who'd baptized half the village and buried the other half's parents. When he reached Brennan's table, he paused, his weathered face creasing in what might have been concern or calculation. "Mr. Brennan, I trust your work proceeds well?" "It does, Father. The bog's yielding its secrets gradually." "Some secrets are better left undisturbed." The priest's tone remained conversational, but his eyes held warning. "The bog has been here since before memory. It's taken many things over the years. Cattle, crops, even men. But it's also protected things. Preserved them, you might say." "Peat preserves everything," Brennan agreed carefully. "Wood, leather, even flesh remains intact for centuries." "Indeed. And sometimes what's preserved is meant to remain so. The past has a way of creating problems for the present when it's dug up carelessly." Father O'Neill smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I merely suggest caution. The people here have long memories and deep loyalties. They remember who helped them during the Hunger Years and who didn't." The warning was clear enough. The famine, though 25 years past, remained a living wound in Ireland's memory. Those who'd shown kindness then had earned loyalty that transcended law or government. Those who hadn't, well, the bog took many things. After the priest moved on, Brennan found himself studying the pub's patrons with fresh attention. How many of them carried secrets? How many knew about the cultivated reeds, the musical barrier that kept strangers from venturing too deep into the marsh? Young men clustered in corners, speaking in low voices that died when outsiders approached. Older men smoked their pipes and watched everything while appearing to see nothing. Paddy Doyle sat with a group of his peers, but Brennan noticed how the lad's attention kept drifting to the door, how he started at unexpected sounds. The boy knew something, was part of something, but hadn't yet learned to hide his nervousness properly. It was the curse of youth, hearts that showed every secret on their sleeves. On the morning of the 25th, as he and Paddy worked near the bog's eastern edge, Brennan made a discovery that changed his understanding of the entire situation. They were measuring the depth of peat in a section where the musical reeds grew thickest, when Brennan's sounding rod hit something that wasn't bottom. "There's something down there," he said. "Work on the rod to determine the obstruction's extent." "About 4 feet down. Solid, but not stone." Paddy's face had gone pale. "Could be an old tree trunk. Bog oak, worth good money if it is." But Brennan knew wood's resistance, and this wasn't it. This felt like something constructed, something placed. He marked the location carefully in his notebook, then made a decision that would have consequences he couldn't yet foresee. "We'll leave it for now," he said. "Continue mapping." Whatever's down there has been there a long time. A few more days won't matter. Relief flickered across Paddy's features before he could hide it. Aye, sir. Best to be thorough with the mapping first. That evening, Brennan sat alone in his room studying his maps and notes by candlelight. The bog was revealing itself to be more than a natural feature. It was a hiding place, a protector of secrets. The musical reeds were just the guardian at the gate. What lay beyond, buried in the peat's preserving embrace, was something that half the village seemed to know about, and the other half suspected. He thought about Father O'Neill's warning, about missing medical supplies, about young men with nervous eyes and older men with careful silence. The Fenian rising of '67 had failed, but the spirit that drove it hadn't died. It had gone underground, literally perhaps, hidden in places where the authorities wouldn't think to look, protected by superstition and community solidarity. September 27th dawned clear for once, the perpetual mist lifting to reveal a sky the color of weathered pewter. Brennan had spent the previous evening constructing a hypothesis about the musical reeds, filling pages of his notebook with calculations about wind velocity, reed diameter, and resonant frequencies. Now came the test, the engineer's moment of truth when theory met reality. He'd arranged to meet Dr. Hayes at the bog's edge, wanting another educated witness to his experiment. The doctor arrived precisely at 9, carrying a leather satchel filled with his own instruments, thermometers, barometers, and various glass containers for specimens. "I've brought my anemometer," Hayes said, producing a delicate device with rotating cups. "Thought we might measure the wind speed when the crying begins." They worked through the morning, taking careful measurements of the musical reeds. Brennan had identified 3 distinct varieties growing in calculated patterns. The tallest stood nearly 8 feet, with natural holes that time and weather had worn through their hollow chambers. A middle variety grew denser, creating a baffle that channeled wind in specific directions. The shortest formed a carpet that whispered constantly, providing an underlying drone to the bog's symphony. "Look at this," Brennan said, showing Hayes how someone had carefully thinned certain stands, creating corridors where wind would accelerate. "This isn't random growth. Someone has been maintaining this for years, perhaps generations." "But why?" Hayes wondered aloud, though his expression suggested he had his own theories. That's what we're going to discover this evening. Paddy had been unusually quiet all morning, responding to direct questions but offering none of his usual eager observations. When Brennan sent him back to the village for additional supplies, the boy seemed relieved to go. Alone with Hayes, Brennan decided to probe carefully. "You mentioned missing medical supplies the other night." "Yes, curious thing. Not just laudanum. Quinine, bandages, even surgical instruments have gone astray. Someone's building quite a medical depot. Or preparing for casualties." Hayes met his eyes steadily. That had occurred to me. "Though, what kind of casualties might be expected in peaceful Galway?" The question hung between them, unanswered but understood. Both men knew that Ireland's peace was always conditional, always temporary. The failed rising of '67 had left wounds that hadn't healed, grievances that hadn't been addressed. If men were stockpiling medical supplies, it suggested they expected to need them. As afternoon approached evening, they prepared for the experiment. Brennan had brought several items. Sheets of canvas to block wind, long poles to disturb the reeds, even a hunting horn to compare sounds. They positioned themselves where they could observe the entire musical section of the bog. The mist began rising around 5 o'clock, first in wisps, then in rolling banks that transformed the landscape into something primordial. With it came the wind, gentle at first, then steadier. Hayes monitored his anemometer while Brennan watched the reeds. 5 miles per hour, Hayes reported. Southwest direction. The first sounds came as whispers, the shortest reeds vibrating in the breeze. Then, as the wind strengthened and found the precise angle, the taller reeds joined in. The sound built slowly, naturally, until the crying began in earnest. That mournful, almost human wail that had sent 3 of Lord Ashford's workers fleeing in terror. 7 miles per hour now, Hayes said, but his scientific detachment couldn't hide his awe. My God, Brennan, it's magnificent. And it was. The bog had become a vast organ played by nature itself, producing sounds that seemed impossible from mere vegetation. Brennan moved forward with one of his canvas sheets, blocking a crucial wind corridor. The crying faltered, changed pitch. He removed the block and it resumed. "Natural phenomenon confirmed," he said with satisfaction, "but enhanced by human design." They spent another hour experimenting, documenting how different wind speeds and directions produced various sounds. The crying was most pronounced at dusk and dawn, because those were when temperature differentials created the specific wind patterns needed. The mist was necessary, because it indicated the atmospheric conditions were right. As darkness fell and they prepared to leave, Brennan noticed something else. A section of ground near the densest reed growth that seemed oddly regular, too flat for natural bog. He'd seen similar signs before, when drainage work had uncovered old foundations or buried structures. "Hayes," he called quietly, "bring your lamp." Together, they examined the area. The peat here was different, more recently formed, perhaps disturbed and reformed. Brennan used his sounding rod carefully, feeling for what lay beneath. 4 feet down, the rod hit something solid. Not stone this time, but wood. Treated wood that hadn't decayed despite the bog's acidic environment. A platform of some kind, Brennan murmured. "Or a cover." Hayes knelt beside him, his face grave in the lamplight. "Brennan, perhaps some things are better left undiscovered. Is that your medical opinion? It's my opinion as someone who lives in this community, who needs to continue living here after you've finished your work and gone." Hayes paused, choosing his words carefully. "There are currents in this village, old loyalties and new grievances mixing in ways that could overflow their banks if disturbed." Before Brennan could respond, they heard footsteps on the bog path. Patty appeared, but not alone. Siobhan McCarthy walked beside him, and her presence here at night in the dangerous bog told Brennan more than any words could have. "Gentlemen," she said calmly, as if meeting them in the village square. "Patty said you were working late. I thought you might appreciate some refreshment." She held up a basket that might have contained food, but seemed curiously heavy. The 4 of them stood there in the lamplight, each understanding that this was a moment of recognition, of cards being partially shown. Siobhan's eyes met Brennan's steadily, and in them he saw not fear, but evaluation. She was taking his measure, determining whether he was threat or ally, or something more complex. "Miss McCarthy," Brennan said carefully, "the bog at night is dangerous for those unfamiliar with its ways." "Indeed it is, Mr. Brennan. Many dangerous things hide in bogs. Some are natural, sucking pools and poison gases. Others are man-made, old feuds and new purposes. A wise man learns to distinguish between dangers that must be eliminated and those that serve a purpose. The wind picked up again, and the bog resumed its crying. But now Brennan heard it differently. Not as a mystery to be solved, but as a guardian's warning, a protector's voice. The cultivated reeds weren't just creating supernatural fear to keep people away. They were announcing the presence of strangers, alerting those who needed to know when outsiders ventured too close to secrets. "We should return," Hayes said quietly. "The mist is thickening." They made their way back along the path, Siobhan and Paddy leading with the sure-footedness of those born to this landscape. At the bog's edge, where the path split between village and estate, Siobhan turned to Brennan. "Your report to Lord Ashford will explain the crying, I suppose." "The acoustic properties of the reeds, yes. A natural phenomenon, as I suspected." "Natural," she repeated, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Yes, that would be the wisest explanation. Natural things don't require further investigation, do they? They simply are what they are." October 2nd brought the kind of persistent rain that turned the world into watercolor paintings of gray and green. Brennan stood at the bog's edge in his oilskin coat, water streaming from his hat brim, staring at the spot he'd marked 5 days earlier. The wooden structure beneath the peat had occupied his thoughts through sleepless nights, presenting him with an engineer's puzzle wrapped in a moral dilemma. Paddy hadn't appeared that morning. A message delivered by a nervous boy claimed illness, though Brennan suspected the ailment was more of conscience than constitution. No matter, some investigations were better conducted alone. The sounding rod went down easily through the rain-softened peat. 4 feet as before, then the solid resistance of treated wood. Brennan had brought a narrow spade, the kind used for cutting peat blocks. He worked methodically, removing the covering layer with the care of an archaeologist uncovering ancient pottery. What emerged was a trapdoor, perhaps 3 feet square, made of oak planks sealed with tar. Iron hinges, well greased despite their age, suggested regular maintenance. A recessed handle lay flush with the wood, nearly invisible unless you knew to look. The craftsmanship was excellent. This was no hasty construction, but something built to last, to resist the bog's perpetual appetite for decomposition. Brennan paused, rain pattering against his coat, considering his options. Lord Ashford had hired him to drain the bog and explain the crying phenomenon. He'd done the latter and was prepared to do the former, but this was something else entirely. Opening this door would cross a line from observation to involvement, from witness to participant. He pulled the handle. The door lifted on silent hinges, revealing a cavity lined with more tarred wood. A ladder descended into darkness. Brennan lit his lamp, noting how the space below seemed dry, despite being surrounded by waterlogged peat. Clever construction. Whoever built this understood water tables and hydrostatic pressure. The chamber below was perhaps 8 feet square and 6 feet high. Along 3 walls sat wooden crates, military in their uniformity, each marked with codes that meant nothing to him but suggested organization and planning. The 4th wall held smaller boxes, different in construction, possibly medical supplies given their Red Cross markings, though that symbol had been painted over with black. Brennan opened one of the larger crates, though he suspected what he'd find. Rifles, wrapped in oiled cloth. British military issue, likely stolen or diverted from army supplies. Another crate held ammunition. A third contained items he didn't immediately recognize, metal tubes and mechanisms that might have been bomb-making materials. Mother of God, he breathed, the weight of discovery settling on his shoulders like a sodden coat. This wasn't some remnant of the '67 Rising. These weapons were new, modern, ready for use. The Fenians, or whatever they called themselves now, weren't finished. They were preparing, planning, waiting for the right moment to strike again. He climbed out quickly, closing the trapdoor and replacing the peat covering with shaking hands. The rain would hide the signs of disturbance within hours. As he worked, his mind raced through implications. Half the village must know about this cache. Siobhan certainly did, and Paddy, and likely Father O'Neill. They'd been watching him, evaluating whether he posed a threat to their secret. A sound made him turn. Footsteps on the bog path. For a wild moment, he thought about the weapons below, about men who killed to protect such secrets. But it was only Dr. Hayes, carrying his medical bag and looking troubled. "Brennan, I thought I might find you here." "Hayes?" Brennan tried to keep his voice steady. "Unpleasant weather for a nature walk." The doctor looked at the disturbed peat, at Brennan's muddy hands, at the carefully neutral expression on the engineer's face. "I've just come from the Donnelly cottage. Their youngest has fever. Would have been treatable with quinine, but," he shrugged, "missing supplies, you remember." The message was clear. While weapons waited underground for some future violence, children suffered present ailments for want of medicine. The revolution's priority was bullets over bandages, ideology over immediate need. "I may have located some of your missing supplies," Brennan said carefully. Hayes met his eyes. "Have you now? And what does an engineer propose to do with such a discovery?" Before Brennan could answer, they heard more footsteps, multiple people moving fast. Through the rain came Paddy Doyle, no longer feigning illness, accompanied by two men Brennan didn't recognize. Hard men with careful eyes and hands that stayed near their pockets. "Mr. Brennan?" Paddy said, breathless and scared. "These gentlemen need to speak with you." The taller stranger stepped forward. Not local. His accent when he spoke marked him as Dublin, maybe educated. "Mr. Brennan, we understand you've been thorough in your survey work, perhaps too thorough. I'm conducting the investigation Lord Ashford hired me for, and finding things that weren't lost, merely stored." The man's tone remained conversational, but threat lurked beneath it like rocks under river water. "The question now is what you intend to do with your discoveries." Brennan felt the weight of the moment, the balance point where his next words would determine not just his immediate safety, but his place in the moral landscape of this conflict. He thought of his sister's family in Cork, depending on the money he sent. He thought of Lord Ashford, who'd hired him in good faith. He thought of the weapons below his feet, waiting to create widows and orphans. "I've discovered that the bog's acoustic properties are caused by specifically cultivated reeds," he said evenly. "A fascinating natural phenomenon that explains the local superstitions. My report will recommend partial drainage that preserves these unique botanical features while reclaiming sufficient land for Lord Ashford's purposes." The strangers exchanged glances. "And your survey found nothing else of note?" "Bogs are full of mysteries, but I'm an engineer, not an archaeologist. I concern myself with water management, not historical artifacts." The shorter stranger spoke for the first time, his accent pure West Country. "Historical artifacts have a way of becoming current events, Mr. Brennan. Best they remain buried until their time." "If they're buried deep enough, drainage work won't disturb them," Brennan replied. Proper engineering requires working with existing conditions, not against them. A long moment passed, rain pattering against oilskin coats, the bog's reeds whispering their eternal song. Finally, the taller stranger nodded. "Continue your work then, Mr. Brennan. But remember, bogs preserve things, bodies especially. They last for centuries, looking fresh as the day they went in." The threat couldn't have been clearer, but Paddy stepped forward, young face determined despite his fear. "Mr. Brennan's a good man. He understands things, don't he, Dr. Hayes?" Hayes, who'd remained silent throughout, now spoke carefully. "Mr. Brennan is a professional. He completes his contracts to the letter, nothing more or less. Isn't that right, Brennan?" "Precisely. I drain bogs. I don't dig up the past." The strangers studied them all for another moment, then turned without another word and disappeared into the rain. Paddy remained behind, shaking like a wet dog. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brennan." "My brother, he's with them. When they heard you'd found, I had to tell them. They'd have found out anyway, and then..." He couldn't finish. "You did what you had to do, lad." Brennan put a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. "We all do." Hayes cleared his throat. "Brennan, about those medical supplies, if some were to be redirected to where they're actually needed..." "I imagine such things happen all the time. Crates get damaged, contents scattered, natural wastage." Brennan looked at where the weapons lay hidden. "Though I'd suggest any recovery operations wait until my drainage work is complete. Wouldn't want any accidents." The 3 days following Brennan's discovery passed in a strange suspension, like the pause between lightning and thunder. October 5th through 7th brought unseasonable warmth that made the bog steam like a witch's cauldron, its vapors carrying the sweet, sick smell of vegetation returning to earth. Brennan continued his work with meticulous care, mapping and measuring, all while aware of being watched by unseen eyes. He'd established a new routine. Each morning, he worked alone, making detailed drawings of drainage channels that would carefully avoid certain areas. The engineering was actually more challenging this way. Redirecting water flow around the weapons caches without making the avoidance obvious required all his 20 years of experience. The bog fought him at every turn, as if it knew he was trying to preserve its secrets while still claiming victory over it. Paddy had returned to assist him, but the easy rapport between them had been replaced by careful courtesy. The boy carried himself differently now, older somehow, burdened with the weight of divided loyalties. They worked in companionable silence, both understanding that some things were safer left unspoken. On the afternoon of October 5th, while measuring elevations near the eastern boundary, Brennan noticed fresh boot prints in the soft ground. Several men, moving in formation, military in their spacing. They led toward another section of the bog he hadn't yet surveyed. He made a note to avoid that area entirely. That evening at McCarthy's, the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations were quieter, more guarded. Men who usually lingered over their pints drank quickly and left. Even old Moira Flanagan seemed subdued, her usual stories replaced by silent observation from her corner by the fire. "You're making progress with your work, Mr. Brennan?" Siobhan asked, bringing his usual meal of stew and brown bread. "Steady progress, Miss McCarthy. Though I've had to revise my initial plans. The bog's geology is more complex than I first assumed." She studied him for a moment. "Complexity can be a virtue. Simple solutions rarely account for all variables." Before he could respond, the pub door opened, admitting Constable Fitzgerald in full uniform. The remaining patrons found urgent reasons to leave until only Brennan, Dr. Hayes, and Father O'Neill remained. The constable approached their table with the deliberate stride of a man on official business. "Mr. Brennan, I understand you've been thorough in your survey work." "As thorough as necessary for drainage planning." Fitzgerald pulled out a chair, settling his bulk with a sigh. He was a man caught between worlds, Irish by birth and sympathy, but wearing the Crown's uniform and drawing the Crown's coin. "There's been word from Dublin. The authorities are concerned about possible arms smuggling in the western counties. They're particularly interested in isolated areas where weapons might be hidden." Father O'Neill spoke mildly. "Sure, and that's a concern for all law-abiding citizens, Constable." "Indeed, Father." "Which is why I'm making inquiries of anyone who's been working in remote locations." Fitzgerald's eyes never left Brennan's face. "A man surveying a bog, for instance, might notice unusual disturbances in the ground, things that didn't belong." The weight of the moment pressed down on them all. Brennan could feel the tension radiating from the others, though each maintained their calm facade. Here was the test of his resolve, the moment where he chose his side in Ireland's eternal conflict. "Bogs are full of strange things, Constable," Brennan said evenly. "Old timber that looks fresh cut, iron that should have rusted away centuries ago. The peat preserves everything and nothing, depending on conditions. A man could drive himself mad trying to date what he finds." "But surely modern weapons would be recognizable, if one found such things. But my concern is water flow and soil composition. I'm mapping what needs to be drained, not conducting archaeology." Fitzgerald leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight. "You know, Mr. Brennan, there are those in Dublin who'd reward a man handsomely for information about hidden weapons. Enough to set up an engineering firm of his own, perhaps. No more working for hire." The temptation was real, and Brennan let himself feel it for a moment. Financial security, independence, freedom from the constant worry about money. All for simply telling the truth about what he'd found. And there are those in Ireland who'd remember such a man forever, Father O'Neill observed quietly. "Memory is long here, Constable. Longer than any man's life." "Are you threatening Mr. Brennan, Father?" "Not at all. Simply observing that choices have consequences. In this life and the next." Dr. Hayes cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, perhaps we're creating drama where none exists. Mr. Brennan is a professional engineer conducting a drainage survey." "Nothing more." Fitzgerald stood slowly. "Of course. Though I should mention, Mr. Brennan, that Lord Ashford has been making inquiries about your progress. He seems anxious for results. It would be unfortunate if he felt you were withholding information relevant to his estate's security." After the constable left, the three men sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Father O'Neill spoke. "You're walking a narrow path, Mr. Brennan." "I'm doing the job I was hired for." "And nothing more?" Brennan met the priest's eyes. "I found that excess enthusiasm in any direction tends to create more problems than it solves." On the morning of October 7th, Brennan found an envelope slipped under his door. No signature, But the message was clear. The bog keeps its secrets. Those who respect this truth find their work goes smoothly. Those who don't find difficulties. Enclosed was a detailed map of the bog, marked with areas to avoid, remarkably similar to his own private notations.
He burned the letter but kept the map, comparing it with his official surveys. Whoever had drawn it knew the bog intimately, had marked not just the weapons caches, but natural hazards, rare plant colonies, even nesting sites for birds. It was the work of someone who loved this landscape, who saw it as something to be protected rather than conquered. That afternoon, while working near the musical reeds, he encountered the two strangers from before. They emerged from the mist like figures from mythology, moving with practiced silence across the treacherous ground. "Mr. Brennan," the taller one said, "we've been observing your work. You show admirable discretion. I show professional focus." The shorter man actually smiled at that. "Call it what you will, but know that your professional focus is appreciated. There are many in this county who won't forget your courtesy. I don't seek anyone's gratitude, just to complete my contract and move on. And you will."
"But perhaps with more friends than you know." The taller stranger produced a small leather purse, heavy with coin. "For your discretion." Brennan didn't touch it. "I can't be bought." "Not a purchase. Call it insurance. Things have a way of becoming difficult for those who oppose certain interests, but those who show understanding find their paths smoother." They left the purse on a stone and vanished back into the mist. Brennan stared at it for a long moment, calculating. Not taking it might be seen as rejection, hostility even. Taking it made him complicit. He compromised by leaving it where it lay, neither accepting nor refusing, letting the bog decide its fate. October 9th arrived wrapped in the kind of dense fog that made the world intimate and threatening in equal measure. Brennan sat in his room above McCarthy's, studying his drainage plans by lamplight, when urgent knocking interrupted his calculations. He opened the door to find Paddy Doyle, soaked with dew and panic in equal measure. "Mr. Brennan, sir, I need to tell you something. Can't keep it in anymore. It's eaten me alive." Brennan pulled the boy inside, noting how his hands shook as he accepted a glass of whiskey from the engineer's private bottle. Youth and secrets made poor companions. The young lacked the calluses that let older men carry sharp truths without bleeding. "My brother Sean," Paddy began, then stopped, started again. "He's with them, the organization. Has been since the Rising, though he was just a boy then. They've got him convinced that Ireland's moment is coming, that all the preparation will mean something this time. And you don't believe it. I don't know what to believe anymore." The whiskey had brought color back to Paddy's cheeks, but his eyes remained haunted. "They talk about freedom and justice, but all I see is more weapons being hidden, more young men learning to hate. And now you're here, and you know about the caches, and they're watching you, and I'm afraid." The boy's voice cracked. Brennan recognized the weight crushing him, the terrible burden of divided loyalty that was Ireland's particular curse. Every family had its divisions, its careful silences around the dinner table, its unspoken knowledge of who stood where when the darkness came calling. "What exactly are you afraid of, Paddy?" "That they'll hurt you if you report what you've found. That they'll hurt you if you don't, because Constable Fitzgerald is suspicious. That my brother will die for something that won't change anything anyway." The words tumbled out like water through a broken dam. "And I'm afraid that I'm a coward for not believing, for wanting to study engineering instead of revolution."
Before Brennan could respond, footsteps on the stairs announced another visitor. Siobhan McCarthy entered without knocking, her usual composure replaced by urgency.
We need to talk, all of us. Patty, stop looking like a whipped dog. Mr. Brennan, there are things you need to know before tomorrow. Tomorrow? Lord Ashford's called a meeting. He wants your preliminary report, and he's invited several local magistrates to hear it. The authorities are pressuring him about the bog, about potential security threats. She moved to the window, peering through the curtain at the street below. The organization knows about this meeting. They think you're going to expose everything. Brennan felt the walls of his carefully maintained neutrality beginning to crack. And are they planning something? Some want to act first. Remove the weapons tonight, though that risks exposure. Others, she paused, and when she continued her voice was carefully neutral. Others think the problem might be the engineer, not the weapons. The threat hung in the air like the fog outside. Patty made a sound that might have been a sob or a curse. Brennan found himself oddly calm, the way he'd felt once when a scaffold had collapsed beneath him, that moment of clarity when survival depended on correct choices made quickly. "Bring them here," he said. "What?" "The leadership, whoever makes decisions. Bring them here, tonight. We're going to solve this like engineers, not warriors." Siobhan studied him for a long moment. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Mr. Brennan. I'm very tired of walking on bog ground, never knowing where the next step will sink me. Time for solid foundation." Within an hour, his small room had filled with unexpected guests. Father O'Neill arrived first, his presence lending an air of reluctant respectability. Dr. Hayes came next, medical bag in hand as always. Then the two strangers from the bog who introduced themselves simply as Collins and Murphy, names as likely to be real as Brennan's chances of sprouting wings. Finally, accompanied by Siobhan, came a young man who looked enough like Patty to be his twin in 10 years' time. Sean Doyle had his brother's features hardened by conviction, his eyes carrying that peculiar intensity of those who'd found their cause and would ride it to glory or grave. "So," Collins said, assuming leadership with natural authority, "the English engineer wants to negotiate." "Irish engineer," Brennan corrected mildly. "Cork-born, Trinity-educated, trying to make an honest living in a dishonest world." "Yet you work for Lord Ashford." "A man needs to eat. And Lord Ashford, whatever his origins, has been better to his tenants than most. Ask anyone here." Father O'Neill nodded reluctantly. "It's true. During the famine, the Ashford family spent themselves nearly to bankruptcy feeding the local people. They could have evicted, consolidated, profited from misery like so many others. They didn't." "Ancient history," Sean Doyle said sharply. "The issue now is the weapons." "Our weapons. Our chance to strike a blow for freedom." "Freedom," Brennan repeated, letting the words sit in the room like an uninvited guest. "Tell me, Mr. Doyle, what does freedom look like? Because from where I sit, it looks like young men with guns fighting other young men with guns, while the powerful watch from their windows and the poor bury their children." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. I've drained bogs from Antrim to Kerry. I've seen the same hidden caches, the same secret meetings, the same young men convinced that this time will be different. You know what else I've seen? The aftermath, the reprisals, the way communities tear themselves apart hunting for informers." "So you'll inform?"
Murphy's hand moved toward his pocket. "I'll do what I came here to do. Drain enough bog to satisfy Lord Ashford while preserving what needs preserving. My report will explain the musical reeds as a natural phenomenon worth maintaining as a curiosity.
The drainage plan will focus on areas of lesser archaeological interest. And the weapons?" Brennan pulled out his map, spreading it on the small table. "Look at this. My proposed drainage channels avoid all your marked areas. The water flow will actually provide better concealment, creating natural barriers to casual exploration. But here's my condition. Some of those medical supplies get redirected to actual medical use. Children are dying for want of quinine while you stockpile for a war that may never come." Dr. Hayes leaned forward. "I could manage that distribution, quietly." Sean started to protest, but Siobhan placed a hand on his arm. "It's a fair compromise, Sean. We keep our insurance for the future, but help our people in the present." "There's one more thing," Brennan continued. "The musical reeds. That cultivation needs to continue, become a source of pride rather than fear. Turn the Bog Maiden into a tourist attraction, bring in money from outside. Give people a reason to prosper that doesn't involve revolution." Collins laughed, short and sharp. "You're proposing we turn our defensive barrier into a carnival show? I'm proposing you give this community something to build rather than something to hide. Revolution isn't the only way to claim dignity." Father O'Neill spoke into the silence that followed. "There's wisdom in this. The Bible speaks of beating swords into plowshares. Perhaps we might beat our fears into music." The debate continued for another hour, sometimes heated, sometimes thoughtful. But gradually, like sediment settling in still water, agreement emerged. The weapons would remain hidden but inactive. Medical supplies would flow to those who needed them. The bog would be partially drained, partially preserved, its musical qualities becoming a feature rather than a threat. Lord Ashford's study seemed smaller with the addition of 3 magistrates, 2 representatives from the Royal Irish Constabulary, and the Protestant minister from the neighboring parish. October 12th had dawned clear and cold, the kind of day that made the bog steam and the great house's windows fog with the breath of nervous men. Brennan stood before them with his maps and charts, aware that every word would be weighed, measured, and potentially used against someone. "Gentlemen," he began, unrolling his largest map across the mahogany table. "After 3 weeks of comprehensive survey work, I can report that the Brackenmore Bog presents both challenges and opportunities for development." Magistrate Healy, a thin man who looked like he'd been dried and pressed like a flower, leaned forward. "We're particularly interested in your findings regarding the reported disturbances. These supernatural claims have created considerable anxiety. Understandably so." Brennan produced his detailed drawings of the musical reeds. The phenomenon locals call the Bog Maiden's crying is in fact a remarkable acoustic occurrence created by wind passing through hollow reed structures. Observe the measurements here. He spent 20 minutes explaining the science, demonstrating with a small reed sample how different wind angles produced various tones. The men listened with the satisfaction of those hearing their rational worldview confirmed. Even Constable Fitzgerald seemed to relax slightly, though his eyes remained watchful. "Fascinating," Lord Ashford said. "But surely we can eliminate this effect through drainage." "We could," Brennan agreed carefully. "However, I would propose an alternative.
These musical reeds represent a unique botanical and acoustic phenomenon, possibly found nowhere else in Ireland.
Preserved and properly presented, they could become an attraction for scientific minds and curious visitors. The village could benefit from such interest. The second magistrate, a younger man named Burke, snorted. "You're suggesting we maintain a source of superstitious terror as a tourist attraction?" "I'm suggesting we transform fear into wonder through understanding. The drainage plan I've developed would reclaim 60 acres of productive land while preserving the musical reed habitat in a controlled area. Here, let me show you." He produced his modified drainage map, the one that carefully skirted the weapons caches while appearing to follow natural geological patterns. The bog's underlying geology dictates certain constraints. This limestone ridge here, these clay deposits there, they create natural channels that we must work with rather than against. "And you found nothing else of concern in your surveys?" This from the senior constable, a major named Blackwood, who'd traveled from Galway specifically for this meeting. Brennan met his gaze steadily. "I found what one would expect in an Irish bog. Old timber preserved by the peat, iron deposits that might be ancient tools or natural formations, the remnants of field systems from before the bog formed, possibly centuries old. Nothing of contemporary significance. No signs of recent disturbance, hidden materials. Major, if men were hiding things in that bog, they'd have to be mad to put them where I'm planning to drain. The areas I've marked would be underwater half the year once the channels are cut, completely unsuitable for storage of anything valuable." It was a masterful misdirection, technically true while completely misleading. The caches were indeed in areas that would remain dry, protected by his careful engineering. Father O'Neill had entered quietly during the discussion, standing near the door like a man ready to provide last rites or quick escape as needed. "If I might add, gentlemen, the transformation of the bog from a source of fear to one of scientific interest would greatly benefit the community's morale. Employment in construction, maintenance of the preserved areas, perhaps even small commercial ventures for visitors." "The priest makes a practical point," Lord Ashford observed. "But what of the costs?" Brennan pulled out his estimates. "Initial drainage work would require 15 laborers for 3 months. Channel maintenance would provide permanent employment for 3 men. The preserved reed area would need minimal oversight. Nature maintains itself if properly bounded." The discussion turned to practical matters: costs, timelines, labor sourcing. Brennan answered with the precision of someone who'd thought through every detail, which he had, though not always for the reasons they assumed. When questions veered towards security concerns, he consistently redirected to engineering challenges. "There is one matter," Constable Fitzgerald said as the meeting seemed to be winding down. "We've had reports of strangers in the area, men who might be connected to subversive organizations. Have you encountered anyone suspicious during your work?" "I've encountered men curious about changes to their landscape," Brennan replied. "Men worried about work, about the future, about whether progress means prosperity or simply new forms of poverty. If that makes them suspicious, then all of Ireland is suspect." Major Blackwood's face darkened. "Mr. Brennan, these are serious matters of state security, and I'm seriously addressing them through productive employment and community development. Give men work, hope, dignity.
These are better deterrents to revolution than any number of constables." Lord Ashford raised a hand before the Major could respond. "Gentlemen, Mr. Brennan was hired for his engineering expertise, not political philosophy. His plan appears sound, his explanation of the bog phenomenon satisfactory. Unless there are specific objections, I'm inclined to proceed with the modified drainage project." The magistrates exchanged glances, conducting one of those silent conversations that men in power perfect over years of committee meetings. Finally, Healy spoke. "We have no objections to the engineering plan as presented, though we recommend regular inspections during the work for safety purposes." "Of course," Brennan agreed. "Bog drainage is dangerous work. Supervision is essential." As the officials prepared to leave, Major Blackwood approached Brennan privately. "You're a clever man, Mr. Brennan. Perhaps too clever." "I'll be watching this project closely." "Watch all you like, Major. You'll see ditches dug and water redirected. Exciting stuff for those who appreciate hydraulic engineering." After they'd gone, Lord Ashford remained, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter. "You handled that well, Brennan. Though I suspect there's more to your story than you're telling." "There always is, my lord. Every man carries secrets. The question is whether they're the kind that hurt others or heal them." Ashford studied him over his glass. "You know, my family came to Ireland 2 centuries ago, convinced we could improve this land. Every generation has learned the same lesson. Ireland changes you more than you change it. Is that a bad thing? That depends on whether you resist the change or embrace it." He moved to the window, looking out over his estate toward the bog. "I know there are things happening in that marsh, Brennan. Things that could destroy what we've built here, or perhaps preserve it, depending on how they're managed." The admission hung between them, an offer of mutual understanding, if not explicit agreement. Brennan chose his words carefully. "Your drainage project will proceed as planned. The bog will yield what it chooses to yield, no more or less. The village will benefit, your estate will prosper, and the musical reeds will sing their ancient songs for new audiences." "And the other matters?" "What other matters? I'm an engineer, Lord Ashford. I see only water and soil, elevation and gradient. If others see more, that's their burden to carry." The morning of October 15th brought the kind of crystalline clarity that made every blade of grass distinct and every drop of dew a tiny lens focusing light. Brennan stood at the bog's edge with his crew of 15 men, ready to begin the work that would transform this landscape while preserving its secrets. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was about to perform engineering that would simultaneously reveal and conceal, drain and protect, change everything while maintaining what mattered most. Paddy Doyle stood among the workers, having insisted on being part of the crew despite Brennan's offer to excuse him. The boy had aged visibly in the past week, his face showing the kind of maturity that came from choosing principles over comfort. Beside him worked his brother Sean, who'd appeared that morning with a simple nod to Brennan and a request for honest labor. "Right then," Brennan addressed the assembled men. "We'll cut the main channel first, following the marked line. Remember, precision matters more than speed. A poorly cut drainage channel becomes an erosion scar that bleeds the land for generations." They began at the bog's lowest point, where water would naturally want to flow. The work was backbreaking, cutting through peat that had accumulated over millennia.
each spadeful releasing the scent of ancient vegetation returning to air. But the men worked with unusual coordination, as if they all understood that this project carried weight beyond mere land reclamation. By noon, they'd cut 50 yards of channel, and already water was beginning to seep and flow, finding its new path with the patience of the inevitable. Brennan watched the dark water moving and thought about the weapons hidden beneath nearby ground, how his careful engineering would create a moat around them, making access more difficult while appearing to simply follow natural contours. Dr. Hayes appeared with his medical bag and a basket of food from McCarthy's. "Thought the men might appreciate refreshment," he said, but his eyes were on the channel's direction, understanding its true purpose. "Any medical emergencies lately?" Brennan asked quietly while the men ate. Curious thing, several cases of fever that had been lingering cleared up suddenly when proper medicine became available. Anonymous donation to my surgery. Quinine, laudanum, even surgical supplies. Hayes smiled slightly. Sometimes the bog gives up treasures when you least expect it. As work resumed, Constable Fitzgerald arrived on horseback, dismounting to observe the proceedings. He walked the length of the cut channel, made notes in his official notebook, then approached Brennan. "Efficient work. This channel will drain significant acreage." "That's the intent, Constable." Fitzgerald lowered his voice. "It will also make certain areas of the bog completely inaccessible once flooded. Almost as if you're creating protective moats around specific locations. Water flows where geology dictates. I merely facilitate natural processes." The constable studied him for a long moment. "You know, Brennan, I've been policing this district for 20 years. I've seen the aftermath of uprisings, the price communities pay for political violence. What you're doing here, creating work, preserving what matters while allowing progress, it might just prevent another cycle of bloodshed." "I'm draining a bog, Constable, nothing more." "Of course." Fitzgerald remounted his horse. "Carry on with your drainage. And Brennan, sometimes the best police work is knowing what not to see." The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. Siobhan McCarthy leading a group of village women carrying more food and drink. But Brennan noticed they also carried bags that seemed heavy for their supposed contents. As the men ate, the women distributed their packages with particular care, and he realized this was the medical supply redistribution in action, hidden within the ordinary kindness of feeding workers. "Miss McCarthy," he said, accepting a cup of tea from her hands, "this is generous." "The village looks after those who look after it," she replied. "Your drainage work will bring prosperity. It's only right we support it." "And the other matter?" She glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. "Collins and Murphy left this morning. Urgent business elsewhere, they said. They left something for you." She handed him what appeared to be a wrapped sandwich, but felt heavier. Inside the paper, he found a small carved stone, a Celtic cross, ancient-looking, the kind found in bogs throughout Ireland. "For the engineer who builds bridges between worlds," she said quietly. "They said you'd understand." As the sun began its descent, the crew had completed nearly 200 yards of the main channel. Water was flowing freely now, dark and primordial, carrying the bog's secrets away from some areas while protecting others. The musical reeds in their designated preservation zone began their evening song as the wind picked up. Father O'Neill arrived to bless the work, as was traditional for any major undertaking. He spoke in Latin first, then Irish, finally English, his words carrying across the landscape.
May this work bring prosperity without destroying heritage, progress without forgetting the past, change that heals rather than harms. The workers crossed themselves, even those Brennan suspected had little use for religion in normal times. There was something about the bog at dusk, the way the mist rose like spirits of the ancient dead, that made even skeptics hedge their bets with the divine. As the crew prepared to leave for the day, Brennan noticed something remarkable. The drainage channel, by lowering the water level in certain areas, had exposed a pattern in the peat. Old field boundaries from before the bog formed, perhaps 1,000 years old. The workers gathered around, marveling at this glimpse of their ancestors' lives. "You see," Brennan said, seizing the teaching moment, "drainage doesn't just reclaim land, it reveals history, shows us the layers of lives lived before us."
This bog is an archive, and we're its librarians, choosing what to preserve and what to transform. Young Sean Doyle stood beside his brother, both of them staring at the ancient field patterns. "Our ancestors farmed here," he said wonderingly. "Before the bog, before the English, before any of the current troubles." "Aye," Brennan agreed. "And their fields failed when the climate changed, when the rain increased and the bog began forming. They adapted or moved on. That's what the Irish have always done, survived changes that would destroy other peoples." Lord Ashford had ridden down from the great house, observing the day's work from a distance. Now he approached, dismounting to stand beside Brennan. "Excellent progress. At this rate, you'll have the main channels complete within the month." "Weather permitting, my lord." Ashford looked at the exposed ancient fields, then at the musical reeds singing in the distance, finally at the workers making their way home in small groups, talking animatedly about the day's discoveries. "You know, Brennan, I hired you to solve a problem. The crying in the bog that was frightening workers. And that problem is solved. The phenomenon is explained, soon to become an attraction rather than a terror." "Yes, but you've done more than that. You've given this community something I couldn't, a way forward that honors the past while embracing the future. That's a kind of engineering they don't teach at Trinity." November in Galway carried winter's promise in every gust of Atlantic wind, and Thomas Brennan stood one last time at the edge of what had been Brackenmore Bog, watching the transformation his work had wrought. 6 weeks had passed since that first evening at McCarthy's, 6 weeks that had changed not just the landscape, but the very fabric of the community that dwelt beside it. The main drainage channels ran like careful sutures across the land, already beginning to blend with the natural contours as grass colonized their banks. 40 acres had been reclaimed, the peat dried enough for spring planting. The remaining bog, including the musical reed sanctuary, persisted in its ancient patience, now bounded by channels that protected rather than threatened its secrets. A small wooden platform had been constructed at the reed sanctuary's edge, complete with a bench and an information board that Dr. Hayes had helped write. Already, curious visitors from Galway City had come to hear the bog's evening song, bringing coins that found their way into village pockets. The bog maiden had transformed from source of terror to point of pride, her voice now explained by science while retaining enough mystery to enchant. Brennan's trunk sat beside him, packed and ready for the morning coach. His next commission waited in County Mayo, another bog, another community balanced between past and future, another puzzle
of water and soil and human nature to solve. But first, one last evening at McCarthy's, one last gathering of those who'd become more than clients or assistants. The pub was fuller than usual for a November evening. Word of his departure had spread, and it seemed half the village had found reason to stop by. Brennan sat at his usual table, nursing a pint of porter that kept being refilled without his asking, watching the faces around him with the peculiar melancholy that came with leaving a place that had marked you. Paddy Doyle sat beside him, clutching a letter that had arrived that morning.
Trinity College, he said for the third time, as if repetition would make it more real. They've accepted me for the engineering program. Partial scholarship, based on your recommendation. You earned it, lad. Your work on the drainage project showed real understanding. Though I suspect you'll find Dublin a bit different from Brackenmore. Different can be good, Paddy replied, then glanced at his brother across the room. Sean had found work maintaining the drainage channels, honest labor that paid enough to support the family farm. The fire had dimmed in his revolutionary eyes, replaced by something more sustainable. Hope for gradual change rather than violent transformation. Dr. Hayes joined them, carrying his inevitable medical bag. "I've had a letter too," he announced. "The Royal College wants a paper on the musical reeds phenomenon. They're particularly interested in the acoustic properties." "You'll be cited, of course, as co-discoverer." "Give the credit to the bog," Brennan replied. "I merely listened to what it was trying to tell us." Father O'Neill made his way through the crowd, blessing conversations with his presence. When he reached Brennan's table, he sat heavily, age showing in the effort. "You've done a peculiar thing here, Mr. Brennan. You've drained a bog while preserving its mysteries, made progress while respecting tradition. That's a balance few achieve." "Balance is just engineering by another name, Father. Equal and opposite forces creating stability." The priest smiled. "Is that what you've created here? Stability?" Brennan considered the question. The weapons still lay beneath the bog, insurance against an uncertain future. But the immediate pressure for their use had dissipated, replaced by employment and possibility. Young men who might have taken up arms were instead taking up shovels, building rather than destroying. It wasn't perfect peace, but perhaps perfect peace was less valuable than imperfect hope. "I've created time," he said finally. "Time for wounds to heal, for tempers to cool, for better solutions to emerge. An engineer can't solve political problems, but he can redirect their flow, channel them into less destructive paths." Siobhan McCarthy approached their table, and the men made room for her. She'd been instrumental in the project's success, coordinating between factions, ensuring the medical supplies reached those in need, while maintaining the necessary fictions that let everyone save face. "We've prepared something for you, Mr. Brennan," she said, producing a wrapped package from the village. Inside was a surveyor's compass, brass and glass, finer than anything Brennan had ever owned. Engraved on the back were words in Irish: "He who measures the earth must first measure his heart." "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," Siobhan replied. "Just remember us when you're draining other bogs, solving other problems. Remember that sometimes the best solution isn't the most obvious one." As the evening wore on, stories were told and songs were sung. Old Moira Flanagan, from her corner by the fire, recounted the legend of the Bog Maiden one last time, but now with a different ending.
How the maiden's cries had brought a wise engineer who understood that some things should flow and others should remain still, and how his wisdom had brought prosperity to the land. Constable Fitzgerald appeared briefly, out of uniform, just another Irishman having a pint. He raised his glass to Brennan across the room, a silent acknowledgement of things known but unspoken, duties balanced against humanity. Near midnight, as the gathering began to disperse, Brennan stepped outside for air. The bog's music carried on the wind, fainter now with the water levels changed, but still present, still haunting. He thought about the weapons hidden beneath the peat, wondering if they'd ever be used, or if they'd slowly decay into archaeological curiosities for some future generation to puzzle over. Lord Ashford's carriage appeared in the street, the man himself stepping out, despite the late hour. "Brennan, glad I caught you. Your final payment." He handed over a purse, heavier than contracted, with a bonus for exceptional service. "The agreed amount would be sufficient, my lord." "The agreed amount was for drainage. You've provided something more valuable. Peace. Or at least its possibility. That's worth any price." They shook hands. Two men who'd never be friends, but had found respect across the divide of class and nationality. As Ashford's carriage departed, Brennan noticed a figure watching from the shadows. Collins or Murphy, he couldn't tell which, keeping watch even now. The man touched his cap in farewell, then melted back into darkness. Brennan returned to the pub to find only a few souls remaining. Dr. Hayes dozed by the fire, medical bag at his feet. The Doyle brothers sat together, planning Paddy's departure for Dublin. Siobhan cleaned glasses behind the bar, humming something that might have been a rebel song or a lullaby. "You'll miss your coach if you don't get some sleep," she said. "Perhaps I'll miss it anyway. Stay another day or two." She smiled, sad and knowing. "No, you won't. You're like water, Mr. Brennan, always finding your level, always moving toward the next low ground that needs filling. It's your nature." She was right, of course. Movement was easier than stillness. The next problem simpler than dwelling on the complexities of the last. But still, something in Brackenmore had shifted inside him, some fundamental understanding of how things might be arranged to accommodate multiple truths simultaneously. In his room, packing the last of his belongings, Brennan found the carved stone Collins and Murphy had left him. He turned it in his hands, feeling the centuries worn into its surface. Ireland was like that stone, ancient, enduring, shaped by time, but never broken. The weapons in the bog, the drainage channels, the musical reeds, all were just the latest chapter in a story that had been telling itself since before memory. He placed the stone carefully in his trunk, between his notebooks full of measurements and calculations. Tomorrow, he would leave for Mayo, for new problems and new compromises. But tonight, listening to the bog singing its ancient song through his window, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Not for solving problems. Those were never truly solved, only transformed. But for finding a way to honor complexity, to engineer solutions that accommodated rather than dominated. The bog sang on, neither lamenting what was lost nor celebrating what was preserved, simply acknowledging what was. And Thomas Brennan, engineer and pragmatist, keeper of secrets and builder of bridges, listened to its music until sleep finally claimed him, carrying him toward whatever waters needed channeling next.